Hello and welcome back once again. Well, we're now nearly at the end of our journey, and in this next couple of videos I'm going to be talking about the topic of chord substitution. This means ways of finding some alternative chords that we can use to replace the conventional chords of the harmonised scale in the common chord progressions and elsewhere. Now, the first couple of examples I'm going to talk about are not, strictly speaking, substitutions at all, since they don't involve altering any of the notes of the key signature. Nevertheless, they offer you some alternatives to the basic triad and seventh chords, so they kind of belong as part of the same topic. The first example I'm going to look at is not, properly speaking, a chord at all. This is the so-called power chord or drone chord. And the reason that we say it's not a proper chord is that a chord is by definition any group of three or more notes played together, and the power chord only contains two notes, that is the root and the fifth. And these two notes are simply duplicated across the fretboard. For example, if we want to play an E drone or power chord, well, the root is E and the fifth is B, so we can play an E, a B, another E, another B, another B, and another E. And there's our power chord. Similarly, for a power chord of A, we can take the root A, the fifth E, another A, the stretch, another E, and another A on the top string, to play the A power chord over 5 strings. As you explore further, you'll find that the standard tuning of a guitar doesn't offer that many opportunities for playing power chords over 5 or 6 strings. Mostly they'd be played over 3 or 4 strings. For example, this A shape can be moved up and down the fretboard if we leave out the open A on string 5, and we can play power chord in various positions, now with the fifth in the bass. That is, fifth, root, fifth, root. To play a power chord in root position, probably the most common fingering is to use just 3 strings. For example, starting on string 6 we have root, fifth, octave. And this same shape can be moved up 1 string to play the power chord on strings 5, 4 and 3. In some positions we can take advantage of the open strings to add another 1 or more strings to this pattern. For example, if I play the G power chord beginning on string 6, I can now add another G on the open G string. If I play the same shape beginning on string 5 to play a B power chord, I can add another B on the open B string. Moving this shape up to fret 7 to play an E power chord, I now not only have another E on the bottom string and another E on the top string, but I have another fifth on the open B string. So this is one more position where I can play the power chord over all 6 strings. As a final trick, if I take this shape beginning on string 6, if I can get just the right curve in the first finger, I can also play the top string while keeping strings 2 and 3 damped, giving me the power or drone chord over 4 strings. And of course, since the power chord contains only 2 notes, it can sometimes be played quite effectively using just 2 strings. When it comes to the uses of power chords, the fact that they contain no third means that they can't be major or minor. This can make them useful as transitional chords when changing key, or in blues-based styles to help to emphasize the tonal ambiguity that's characteristic of the blues. And also, as the name power chord implies, they can have quite a big, fat kind of sound, particularly when played on an overdriven electric guitar, and this has made the power chord an essential ingredient of heavier rock styles. Next up, I want to take a look at extending the harmonization of the major or minor scales. So far, we've been building chords from the scales by stacking intervals of a third, that is, starting from a root note, we add an interval of a third to reach the third of the chord, another interval of a third, major or minor, to reach the fifth of the chord, and another interval of a major or minor third to reach the seventh of the chord. This gives us all the chord tones within one octave of the scale. It's perfectly possible, however, to extend this system beyond the octave and into the second octave. So from the seventh, we can add another third to reach the ninth, another third to reach the 11th, and another third to reach the 13th. If we use all of these notes to build a full 13th chord, you'll find we've now used all the notes of the scale to build a 7-note chord. This has a couple of implications. For one thing, since the chord now contains all the notes of the scale, this means that all the 13th chords within a given key are in fact inversions of each other. More importantly, from the guitarist's point of view, it means that since the chord contains 7 notes and the guitar only has 6 strings, the chord can't be played in full on a standard 6-string guitar, and indeed most 6- and 5-string chords are equally impractical. The chord can't be played in full on a standard 6-string guitar, and indeed most 6- and 5-note chords are equally impractical. This means that if you want to play a 9th, 11th or 13th chord on the guitar, you're going to have to miss out some of the notes. Well, to begin with, it's perfectly standard when playing an 11th chord to miss out the 9th, and equally when playing a 13th chord to miss out both the 9th and the 11th. But this is probably still not going to be enough, so the next candidate to miss out is normally the 5th, assuming it's a chord with a perfect 5th in it. So a couple of reasons for this. One is that, with the exception of the flat 5 chords, the 5th doesn't play a defining role in the structure of the chord. That is to say, the character of the chord as a major, minor, or one of the various kinds of sevenths is not changed by leaving the 5th out of the chord. The other reason is to do with the harmonic properties of the guitar strings, and without delving into the physics of it, I'll just say at this point that when you play a chord on a guitar, normally the ear can hear the 5th quite clearly as a harmonic, even when it's not being played as a distinct note. Now, as to the notes that you should really try to keep in the chord, an important thing to notice is that the 9th, 11th and 13th notes are in fact the same notes as the 2nd, 4th and 6th, so we need to be clear that we're playing a 9th, 11th or 13th chord and not a suspended chord or a 6th chord. In the case of the 9th and the 11th, you should remember that in a suspended chord, the 2nd and the 4th replace the 3rd in the basic triad. So as a general rule, you can say if your chord doesn't contain a 3rd and it contains a 2nd or a 4th, then you're playing a suspended chord. If both the 3rd and the 2nd or 4th are in the chord, then you'd be justified in calling it a 9th or 11th chord. Because the 6th is treated as a concordant or harmonious interval in its own right and doesn't necessarily replace any of the triad tones in the chords, it can be a little trickier to distinguish between a 6th and a 13th chord. And here I draw your attention to the fact that the full 9th, 11th and 13th chords would normally contain the 7th. This means for any of these chords it's desirable to include the 7th in your guitar voicing, but in the case of the 6th or 13th chord, it plays a particularly crucial role in determining whether your chord should be called a 6th chord or a 13 chord. It's also worth pointing out here that if you see on a chord chart a reference to a 9, 11 or 13 chord unqualified by major or minor, then what's intended is a chord built on the dominant seventh form, that is to say, a chord with a major third and a minor seventh, plus the appropriate 9, 11 or 13 note. I'm going to finish this discussion now with a few examples in the key of C major. See if you can figure out how many of my own guidelines I've actually been able to follow in each of these variations of the chord voicings. To begin, here's a C major 9 played on just the middle 4 strings. And of course, since this involves no open strings, this is a transposable chord voicing. A C major 11 we can find quite easily simply by taking the open position C major 7 shape and adding the 11th of F at fret 1 string 1. For the C major 13th, I've chosen a slightly trickier voicing, but also another transposable voicing that uses all 6 strings. Here's a nice simple voicing for the A minor 9. An open position voicing for the A minor 11. And an A minor 13. And finally, using the dominant 7 chord form, a G9. Using just the top 4 strings, again another transposable voicing. A G11 in the open position. And a G13. Having now used up all the notes of the scale, we can see that there's no further possibility for harmonization in thirds. So if we want to find more alternative chords, we're going to have to use altered notes, that is, notes that fall outside of the key signature that we're playing in. And now we are into the realm of true chord substitution. And the first place I'm going to start looking is the melodic minor scale. In its descending form, of course, the melodic minor scale is the same as the natural minor scale, so it's the ascending form of the melodic minor with its sharpened 6th and 7th that we're going to look to find alternative chords. And we do this by harmonizing the melodic minor in exactly the same way that we harmonize the major and natural minor scales, that is, building up intervals of a third. And of course we're already familiar with one of the chords that is generated by this process, that is the 5 chord of the melodic minor scale, which replaces the minor or minor 7th chord of the harmonized natural minor scale with a major or dominant 7th chord. And this is what we've been using throughout these sessions as our 5 chord in minor keys. For the remaining chords of the harmonized melodic minor, we'll find that the 1 chord produces a minor chord with a major 7th in it, replacing the minor or minor 7th of the harmonized natural minor scale. For the 2 chord, we find a minor or minor 7th chord replacing the minor flat 5 or minor 7 flat 5. For the 4 chord, like the 5 chord, the minor or minor 7th becomes a major or dominant 7th chord shape. And for the 6 chord, the major or major 7th is replaced by a minor flat 5 or minor 7 flat 5. That's all the chords of our common chord progressions, leave just 2 chords remaining in the harmonized scale. The 3 chord, for which a major 7th becomes a major 7th with an augmented or sharpened 5th, and the 7 chord, for which a dominant 7th chord is replaced by a minor flat 5 or minor 7 flat 5 chord. Never forgetting that in the case of the 6th and the 7th chords, it's actually the root note of the chord that's the altered note in the melodic minor scale. Now, it will be obvious that you can use these chord substitutions when playing in minor keys, but you can also, if you wish to be more adventurous, use the chords of the harmonised melodic minor scale as substitute chords in the relative major key. When you make use of these chord substitutions, your choice of chords necessarily constrains the choice of notes available to you for melody or lead lines. And with this in mind, you should be aware that the melodic minor scale also has its own distinct set of modes. You can find a complete list of these in any good reference, including my own book. For the moment, I'd just like to concentrate on perhaps the two most important. One of these we're already familiar with, that is the fifth mode of the melodic minor scale, that is the Lydian flat 6 mode. This is the mode with a major third, minor sixth and a minor seventh, and is the mode that we've been using as a chord scale for the major or dominant seventh 5 chord in minor keys. The other mode I'm going to mention at this point is the fourth mode of the melodic minor scale, and that is the Lydian flat 7 mode. This is a mode with a major third, an augmented or sharpened fourth, and a minor seventh. And we'll be hearing more about this particular mode in our next session.